Welcome to Silver Threads, Still Walking, Still Waking. I'm Carla Bergman.
And I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is the show where we trace our present path through the people and stories of the past, as we ourselves, long-term radicals, learn about each other, from each other, and continue to walk, continue to wake. This week, we are joined by Zainab Amadahy. Zainab has a multiracial background that includes African American, Cherokee, Seminole, and European. She's an author of screenplays, nonfiction, and futurist fiction. The most notable of her academic writings is Indigenous Peoples and Black Peoples in Canada, Settlers or Allies, co-authored with Mi'kmaq professor Bonita Lawrence. Today, Zainab writes for Muskrat Magazine and sits on their advisory council. In her role at Children's Peace Theater, she connects elders and senior artists with BIPOC youth who are exploring healing and decolonization through artistic processes. Based in peri-apocalyptic Toronto, Zainab is the mother of 2 grown sons and a cat who allows her to sit on one section of the couch. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you, Zainab. Well, let's get started. We're going to start with our first question we ask all our guests, which is, what was the or a watershed moment for you when you started thinking or becoming more radical?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I'm just wanting to take a step back because where are you guys broadcasting from? Where are you now?
Where am I at this moment? I'm in Vancouver on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands.
Right, okay.
I'm in Sweden.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I just wanted to at least establish and maybe perhaps do a little land acknowledgement or something. So yes, so I'm from Toronto, and so that is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and many other peoples who have had a relationship to this land. So yeah, so that's where I'm coming from. So maybe I can get that first question again. Sorry.
Sure. No, that's great. And we, in our, I think in some point in our show, we have, we say where we're located. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'm in Sweden quite a bit too, but I'm usually in DC, which is Piscataway land. So.
Yeah, so we like to start off our show asking our fabulous guests like yourselves to share a bit about your watershed moment that shifted your thinking.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know that there was any particular pivotal moment, particularly. I was born to parents who were involved politically. They were involved in the civil rights movement. There's a lot going on when I was growing up in the 60s. And so yeah, being mixed race, being Black, being in a situation where I was being bused to school and all this kind of stuff to integrate it and everything, then, I just don't remember any kind of like a magical moment where, this kind of, like I suddenly realized that, there was this power dynamic going on. So
that makes sense.
Something that I thought was really interesting about, and maybe I'm like jumping here, but it was just something that was kind of burning in my mind. Also because this is something that we've talked a lot about in mutual aid circles. And, your work includes, educating and coaching women, people of color, and LGBTQ folks. And, I was looking at the Life on Purpose workshop and, that book that you put out. And there's such a capitalist frame around like motivation and mindfulness and self-care. And it's like, oh, self-care means buying a face mask or something. And so like how, with regards to particularly what's happening right now, like how do we extract that sort of capitalist programming from these very deep and important issues like self-care and community care and collective care?
Well, thank you for that question. That's really something I can sink my teeth into there. I've never characterized any of my work, any of my writings, any of my workshops, anything as self-care. And I know that other people have that have reviewed my books and they've characterized it as self-care, but I've never done that because for me, I was reaching for something that's a little more transformative and a bit deeper than that, or a lot deeper than that, actually. And these days, I like talking about the idea that, and if you want to talk about, for example, in terms of the first question, when I was younger and I was very involved, I think by the time I was in high school as a teenager, I was like on my own. Like that was the first time I was kind of independently involved in my own political work. And I don't feel at that time that there was a lot of expectation on people who were activists or community workers to change themselves, right? So it was more about, the world has to change, society has to change, laws have to change, but we didn't see that that's an interactive or relationship, right? You can't, I can't remember what that quote is, but you can't, create something that doesn't represent your level of consciousness. If you're not feeling peaceful, if you're not a peaceful person, you're not going to be able to create or co-create a peaceful society. If you're still struggling with, issues like your own, in my case, for example, transphobia or homophobia, because I was quite heterosexist and had to learn all of that stuff, then how am I going to create a more just and equitable society? So I think more in terms of healing work and transformative work and raising consciousness and those kinds of things these days. So that's where I would prefer. And maybe it's my, I went through my own process, right, when I was writing this book and doing this work. But I think I was always striving to communicate that was what I was hoping for and wanting, because I don't feel like if society is a mirror of where we are, of where our collective consciousness is, if our organizations and our movements are a reflection of where our collective consciousness is, then we are not going to be able to create anything that's beyond. We're not going to outreach ourselves, right? We can't go any higher than we are, right? We can't bring anybody else higher than where we are. So maybe that answers your question. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. It's a whole different concept. It's not self-care, really. It's more about healing and working on yourself constantly as you do the work in community, as you do the work in movements, but just looking internally and ensuring that you can live up to your values and that your traumas are not being reproduced in the work that you're doing.
This is why I always gravitate towards your work, Zainab, because I also, when I was first starting out organizing independently and doing stuff, I'm glad you said that about the question. First of all, I want to go back to that because I asked myself that question last night and I couldn't answer it because I'm like, wait. It's funny that we came up with it, but because I grew up in a violent home and I can't remember ever not feeling radicalized at the core about my safety as a person, as an individual. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. It's something maybe we should think about and chew on a bit. But I wanted to come back to what you just said. And the reason why I gravitate to your work is because of the nuance and because of the care you put into it, the thoughtfulness. Because I've always done healing work or that personal work, but I kept it private because it was frowned on in the movements. I mean, we can go way back, and this is kind of what's at the root of Emma Goldman's words about dancing, because she was frustrated that there was no place for pleasure and joy in the movement. And I would go so far as saying in healing. And now it's become proliferated that this sort of self-care or whether it's in the spiritual realm or astrology, tarot, it's just become so part of the movement that there's I feel some tension with it because there is a replication of consumer culture, and I don't see that in your work, and I really appreciate that in your work. And I'm curious, I mean, it sounds like you went with it with that deep intention, but there's a way that you interconnect healing and self-exploratory work and that radiates outward that doesn't replicate. And I wonder if you could just say a bit more about that, because I think it's what's lacking in a lot of it.
Mhm. So I guess I like to, at least in a couple of books that I've written, I have a background in medical technology. I worked in endocrinology research for a little bit, like a little minute, and I also did some training in photovoltaic technology or solar energy technology. And so, I fancied myself someone who really enjoyed, science. And, I'm a member of a lot of science blogs and things like this. And there was a time in my life when I got quite sick. And it took a long time for them to diagnose what the problem was. And so I also have an interest in curanderismo, the art of healing as it's practiced in New Mexico, northern Mexico. Those are the traditions that I learned from. And so when I was sick, I got this opportunity because for months and months and months, nobody could really diagnose what was going on with me. And so I had to do my own research about this isn't an uncommon thing. This happens to a lot of people, particularly, my generation. And so I stumbled upon a lot of, mind, body medicine types of things, and recognized that that science was kind of catching up to a lot of the indigenous wisdom teachings that I've been exposed to. I had worked with some elders, and I, as I said, had done some work at the University of New Mexico with curanderismo. And so basically what I learned is that, there are very measurable ways now that we can see how our thoughts and feelings and bodies kind of line up in an energetic way. And as I said, we can measure this with new medical technologies, and we can see a direct relationship. Of course, this is everywhere, the relationship between stress and the body, and stress and wellness, and stress and longevity. But there's also ways of looking now and measuring how we impact each other with our stresses, with our emotional energy, that we have this concept of the biofield now, which is the energy body, which is, this is the scientific name for it. It's called the biofield. And it's comprised of a lot of different energy fields. And it's measurable up to about 6 feet on all sides, up, down, back and sideways and everything. And the biofield, early representations of it was like this bag of energy that surrounded the body, right, type of thing. And so it was the same concept of, okay, the body is boundaried by our skin, right? And so the biofield is like this bubble of energy that's around our body and interacts with our body and determines a lot of the body's function and shape and all kinds of things, right? And also can, if we can learn which pharmaceutical companies right now are doing, they're researching the different energy frequencies and all of this at different parts of the biofield to try and determine, which parts of the biofield relate to which parts of the body, and what frequency ranges denote health in that area of the body and which denote disease and all this kind of stuff. But now we know that it's not a bag of energy around the body, that it's actually something that interacts with the cosmos, really. It interacts we interact with each other, we interact with plants, we interact with animals, with the Earth's electromagnetism, with the sun's electromagnetism, right? And so, again, this really aligns very, very much with various indigenous approaches to wellness and healing, certainly the ones that I came into contact with. And So how does this relate then to political work and healing work? Because, I noticed from my own experience as well as, because, again, I think our movements, our activism kind of is a mirror for who we are and where we're at. I entered activism as a very angry person who had never paid attention much till I was in my 40s or so to healing, to like really, really deep healing and interrogating those traumas and trying to integrate, what they had, what I had experienced. So I was just angry and I did a lot of lashing out. And I don't think this is unusual particularly, but it was something that I came into contact with a lot in other activists, because that's where I was, and that's what I kind of tended to go in activism, and what I tended to attract into my experience. And so, all of the stress, all of the anger, all of the lashing out, all of the fear that that was underneath it all. When I got sick, I realized, that. And I did all this research, I realized that there was a lot of work that I needed to do. So what's going on basically is that when we're in these states, like every thought we have generates an emotion, every emotion we experience has a physical impact on our body and also on our biofield, and that biofield energy gets shared with other people, and it can actually influence under different circumstances. In some cases, people are more influenced, and in other cases, they're less influenced, but we can influence, other people's emotions. And so when we recognize that when people are in a state of fear or stress or anger, or they're contracted in some way for whatever reason, whether it's because they're associating with us, and we whip them up into that state, or whether, they're interacting with a life that has given them reason to feel all of those things, they are less receptive. And again, this is science, but it's backed up by a lot of wisdom. They're far less receptive to receiving new ideas, to cooperating. They have, a little more of a challenge in terms of being able to access their social skills in certain situations, right? All of their social skills. And so when we don't pay attention to our healing and our wellness, and again, integrating the experiences that all of us have with trauma, our own early childhood traumas, our inherited traumas, our collective traumas, our cultural traumas. If we don't work on healing these things, then, we are sharing a lot of stress, anger, distress, with all of the people that we want to work with around transforming our world, our society. And so that was what I recognized. And so, and spiritual people have known this for a long time, and have been telling us this for a very long time, but it was framed very differently. And so it meant something very different until I actually kind of put the two together, the two ways of framing this information together.
And I was wondering, kind of with that, I'm pulling from your interview with Carla for Joyful Militancy, but to kind of expound on that here, you had talked about anger, and in movement spaces, particularly like in high stress situations, like at a pipeline fight or something, anger is it's everywhere. And for a lot of people that I've met, anger is what brought them into this work. Like, oh, I was so angry about fill in the blank, and that's why I'm here. Can you talk a little bit about like the issue of anger, whether it's useful, when it's useful, or like how to address it in these situations?
Yeah, and I think I've actually transformed a little bit my understanding is a bit different than when, so I don't even remember what I said in the interview. That was several years ago. And how long ago was that? Was that like 3, 4 years ago? I don't know, whatever.
It was at least 4, if not 5. Yeah.
So I hope I've evolved since then, but I'm pretty sure I would have a different attitude about that now. So I am not into anymore. I don't feel like I want to be judging, emotions. I mean, I feel like the human experience, we're here as human beings to experience the full gamut of emotions, the ones we like, the ones we don't like, the ones that, jeopardize our health, and the ones that promote wellness, but at the same time, and yes, they all have a function. They all have a reason. They all have a message for us, right? I think of emotions as guidance, that, as long as you're aware of what you're feeling, and this is something that we often aren't. We aren't taught and trained, and it's not valued necessarily in this society to be aware of all of your emotions, and as they rise and fall. But I really feel that it's information that guides us. If we're aware of it, this makes me angry, this makes me sad, this makes me despair, this makes me feel despair, this makes me feel joyful, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have a sense, there's a message in all of those things about what's right, what's wrong, what direction we want to take, what decisions we want to make, what choices we want to make. There's information in all of that. Mm-hmm. So I feel like anger is an appropriate response to a lot of situations that you mm-hmm. encounter in life. I also feel that, and this again, there's a psychological history, although that's not my background at all, but I think that most people that have, written about anger recognize that it's kind of like a layered emotion is what I've called it. It's there's always something underneath it, right? Mm-hmm. We get angry to protect ourselves. Anger is an emotion that protects us from feeling often fear, insecurity, shame, those kinds of emotions, right? So we'd rather get angry because it does feel better. And actually, when you look at the vibrational frequency of anger versus shame versus fear, anger is a higher vibrational frequency. Mm-hmm. And so it does feel better than shame. And shame is the place where people are at, where they're getting suicidal, thoughts and things like this. So anger is a better feeling to grasp onto than shame is. But you don't want to hang out there for a really long time. And it's not like I also recognize that anger was motivating. Anger and the fear that was underneath it, and some of the shame that was underneath it in my case, was motivating my political work, my community work. And when I realized that, when I became emotionally intelligent, you might say, more emotionally aware, I recognized like that's not okay. That's, I really need to be motivated more by love. And when love and respect and connection and all of these things are your motivator, are the intention, behind your work, then your work changes. You make different decisions. You behave differently. Your relationships change, and so on. And so, yeah, I hope that explains that response to the question.
Yeah, no, I love that, like, emotions as guidance. I think that's incredibly powerful, and really kind of like speaks to something that we've talked about in mutual aid spaces recently, is like, be curious about the emotions you're feeling, as opposed to immediately like smacking them down, being like, no, I'm not sad, I'm fine. Or like, no, I'm not angry, it's fine. And being curious and like giving yourself that space, but kind of like you said, like not creating it so that like anger is your main motivator and things like that.
Yeah. And I think too that at least the kind of activist work that I was involved in, the kind of community work that have been involved in. I don't want to generalize at all about our movements, but certainly the things that I feel like I was drawn to that the kinds of movements and work and people because of where I was at, because of my level of consciousness. But I think that activism was one place where I was not only allowed to be angry and to behave angrily, but I was actually encouraged because people saw that and said, this is great. This is what we need. We need, this angry activist energy to be able to confront, to be able to blockade, to be able to do this, to do that, right? So nobody really looked at my behavior, or at least if they did, they never shared it with me. Nobody ever looked at my anger and said, this isn't healthy. It's not healthy for our movement. It's not healthy for our organization. It's not healthy for you. Please do some healing. I will support you in doing that. But and that's what I want to create for other folks, particularly younger folks who are coming up. Not that I want that necessarily that kind of a relationship, but I just want to put so much information out into the world around these issues that, people can recognize for themselves, when healing is needed, and that, there's no shame around it. There's no superficiality around it. It's so interesting that when I first came into the community here in Toronto, I used to hang out with a group, and there was a person in the group, in the circles that I hang out with, who went to Sweat Lodge every single weekend. Every single weekend. And, never really actually, it came in every single weekend with the same issues that he, for the entire time that I knew him, which was probably a couple of years, never really came to resolution on. So you have to, it's not just a matter of going through the motions, right? It's a matter of actually digging for treasure.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think sometimes the Zapatistas talk about this, and we've heard it throughout the years about that, that the importance of saying no, ya basta, against the oppression. And no is where we sometimes have to start. But I think that you're getting to that interesting intersection of that, to not stay there, that we have to do the work together to create an environment of the world we want to be, the world we want to create. It's that tension between not always fighting against, but also prefiguratively creating something and building towards something. So I really appreciate that you're doing that work, particularly with young folks. I agree with you. I think that's where we can it's our future. Yeah.
I can't remember who said it to me, but there was an elder, I can't remember her name. I'm just having one of those moments. But Denise Lynn, she's a Cherokee elder. And I believe it was from her that I heard this idea that if you're feeling anything for more than 20 minutes, it's an emotion. And so she differentiated between feelings and emotion. And I'm not sure 20 minutes is like the cutoff in all cases for every situation of when, feelings become emotion. But she did want to get into the idea that, feelings are meant to be processed through the body. There's energy in emotion, but when it's too long in the body, when you're hanging on to this emotion because for whatever reason you can't, process that away, it becomes stuck and it creates disease. It literally creates disease, not just for you, but for the people that you interact with, particularly the ones you interact with the most. And those are the people that you love. If those are the people in your family, if that's your partner, your children. So you can seriously, in measurable ways, impact another person's wellness and their mental expansiveness is a word I like to use, by not attending to your health. And this is not, when we say interconnected, that's what we're talking about. We're all interconnected, right? All our relations. So, yeah.
You're listening to Silver Threads, part of the Grounded Futures multimedia platform. For more information and to donate to our totally ad-free show, check out groundedfutures.com. You can reach out to us with thoughts and suggestions at silverthreadshow@protonmail.com. You can find out more about our host Eleanor via artkillingapathy.com and our host Carla via joyfulthreadsproductions.com. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, and it was one of the questions that we had put down to ask folks was, sharing some of their story, and you've already started to share like some of that, like those changes even from when Carla first interviewed you. Can you share a little bit more about your journey and how I think sometimes, like especially right now, there are people that are thinking that like, oh, radicalism or activism is something that you get to as like a goalpost and then you hit it and you're like done, or like anti-racist work is like, I'm not a racist anymore, done. And it's like, oh, but this is like something that keeps going. And so I was wondering if you could share a bit more about how that has looked like from the kind of start of your journey to how that's evolving now and continuing to evolve.
Yeah, I feel like we're always, we live in this world in this realm. Not all realms are like this, but we live in a realm where we experience polarities, we experience dualities, and so we are constantly being challenged. And I don't like to think of it as a circle where you are, so it's not a kind of like, as you were saying, it's not like you've done the work and you've accomplished and you can sit, now on your throne and become, this wisdom keeper or whatever, right? But it's also not like a circle where you keep going around and coming to the same places over and over and over again. It's more, to me, I like the visual of the spiral, where each time we come around, we're kind of, again, we're going from one polarity to the other polarity, right? So we're experiencing this on a personal level, we're experiencing this on a social level, on the level of our species, on the level of our planet. We're just, all of us, we're going in these spirals. And so we're exploring one polarity and then we're coming around and we're exploring another polarity and then we're coming back. But every time we come around, theoretically and hopefully, if we've done the work, we're looking at this issue that keeps raising itself, that keeps returning to our attention from a place of higher awareness, from a place of more experience, more wisdom, and so on. And so to give you an example, it would be wellness. For me, or for anybody really, but, for me, one of the examples I can give you from my life is wellness. And, I've never gotten to a place where I can avoid feeling any pain or getting sick or, I get sick like everybody else, despite all this wellness and all this information and all this training and all these tools and all these ceremonies that I have access to and all these medicines, I still get sick, right? And then, it's just another experience where, I can draw on the experiences that I've had from previous, episodes of being sick and, bring this new wisdom, this new knowledge to this new situation, because it's never the same thing that returns in the same way. So hopefully that can answer your question. Like, I just don't think we're ever done. And if we are done, then what are we doing here? We don't need to be in this world of we don't need to be in this realm if we are not being challenged by it. And if we are not being challenged, we're not growing. There's no spiritual growth. So we would be moving on. We would be moving on to somewhere else. Yeah.
Part of that also kind of speaks to that we're always learning and we're always continuing to grow in different ways. And I think like one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about your work is the connecting elders and youth, and sort of, connecting those two different parts of that journey. Can you talk a little bit more about like how, like that specific work of connecting elders and youth?
I love my job so much, I have to say. And my contract ends at the end of the year. It's been a beautiful 3 years. But yeah, so I have been hearing, on and off all of my life from younger people once I got to the point where I could call myself, an older person, that people, well, I think for me, the question started, I was doing a community radio interview, and there were a couple other guests, and they were young Black women, and they were talking about, their experiences with racism and what they felt needed to happen in the school system and all these kind of things. And I just got one of those deja vu moments where it's like, how many times have I sat in on conversations like this, people proposing the same kinds of solutions, some of these solutions having been implemented and it hasn't changed. And so it was a really rich conversation for everyone, because what I was able to understand is that, and these young people articulated it quite well, that, they needed more from their elders. They needed more, about our experiences, about our learnings. They needed to know more, but they also didn't need for us to assume that they weren't going to evolve, the kinds of evolve out of that we couldn't, our solutions or our ways of doing things were not going to, that they were going to evolve those, right? And so it wasn't going to be, in the Indigenous community, as much as I love it and as much as I benefit for it, these circles, I don't know how much of this goes on anymore, because I don't participated in that much, but these circles where, an elder sits at the, in the circle, and everybody sits around this person, and they just talk and they talk and they talk, and sometimes they took and talked for 3 hours. And this isn't the case for everybody, but certainly when I first came to the community here in Toronto, I found a lot of these kinds of circles where elders would talk. And these elders, some elders were more healthier than others. They've all had experience with residential schools and all these kinds of things, but, they would say things that, were homophobic, transphobic. They're still doing it. They would, there was no cultural process for, maybe challenging or questioning some of the teachings that they offered. And it's fine. I think that it has worked. It's been worked. It has worked, in pre-colonial times, where these relationships happened on the land and people were, working together in community. And we didn't have a lot of these colonial influences that devalued our life ways or tried to missionize us and all this kind of thing. It worked really well. But now we have people who are, quite damaged. And yes, they have language, and yes, they have culture, and yes, they have very valid stories. But young people have communicated to me that they were having difficulty finding elders that, would at least be willing to learn to transform their racism, their anti-immigrant sentiments, their transphobia, as I was saying, their homophobia and stuff like that. Anyway, so seeing that need, and also seeing a need for elders to be able to to have formalized structures for elders to pass on what they know, and for elders to learn from younger people as well. So I was really happy to get involved in this work, and it's been very rewarding. Yeah.
Maybe you could just say a little bit about the organization, or is it just thinking about our listeners and where they could find access to it? Are you creating materials from it?
The organization, Children's Peace Theater. And we're in Toronto. And you can check out our website, and there are some visuals that'll be, I think there's some video information on some of our programs, some video documentaries. Like most organizations with the pandemic, we've had to curtail our activities and go online. But yeah, so check out our site. Like I say, we work a lot with BIPOC youth and children, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for doing that. Maybe we could shift to this period in time, and you brought it up, the pandemic, and just, how has this changed your work? But more importantly, I think what I'm interested in hearing about is like, what are your thoughts about the near future? Are you feeling more hopeful, or what has the pandemic opened up for you and your thinking and your ideas?
Well, I think that it's really interesting because a lot of the stories in Indigenous cultures, a lot of the what folks like to call prophecy, pointed to this time coming. And some of them are more specific than others. I mean, there were some folks that actually did talk about, in their own words, a pandemic or a disease that would bring us to the point of, system change, system collapse. And you look at, the Mayan calendar, the Mexica calendar, they all talk about these times, often in metaphorical ways. And so, for some of us, we saw, even without this information, without these stories, without these prophecies, without the calendars and all of that, we wanted, as activists, we wanted to see the system collapse, right? We worked for that. And now it's collapsing, we're afraid, we're terrified, and I noticed that right away. And I'm not saying it's an unreasonable reaction at all, but I feel that the fear that a lot of people are feeling, I'm actually not feeling as fearful. Like I feel a lot of compassion for the suffering that's going on, and the real life challenges that people are experiencing right now. That's for sure. But overall, I feel like this is the moment some of us have worked for, have prayed for, have done ceremony for, and this is an opportunity. It's like labor pains before the baby is born. This is a time of transformation, and I feel like this is our opportunity to dream bigger, to in this context, we can do less work that will, we could do less work and have it go farther, have it be more impactful. I do, to the extent that I understand the teachings that I've received around things like the Mayan calendar and the Mexica teachings, I understand there's a really advanced astronomical knowledge at work here, and I don't know how they managed this. They were frickin' geniuses, but they understand that the Earth and our whole solar system is in a different part of the galaxy, and they talk about these epochs and these eras where we're going at different parts, and we keep going around. We're moving around the galactic center. We're creating a lot of spiraling energy, and they understood somehow that in this time, that whole end of the Mayan calendar nonsense that happened, back in 2012, that December date was really about the turning point when the Earth went from galactic south to galactic north on its pathway. So it's above that line, and that we would be receiving different kinds of energies. And so more feminized energies as opposed to masculine energies is one, more yin as opposed to yang energies. Excuse me. And that these energies, because we interact with energies all the time, and we know this. We're learning more and more about this. If you don't want to accept or understand the Indigenous teachings, we do have some science here, and the science is growing around, how these energies impact us. And so these are more expansive energies that are hitting our entire solar system. And so we are, in my understanding, the efforts that we want to make towards creating more pro-social societies, towards creating more cooperative societies, making use of the divine feminine in our work, drawing on those divine feminine energies, drawing on those yin energies. We are supported now in the galactic ecosphere to be able to do these things. The earth is supporting us. The earth is alive. She's a being. She's going through stuff. And we're coming along with her, and we can go, kicking and screaming, or we can just go with the flow. And going with the flow, going with the natural flow is, you can get a lot done that way, and you can get it done a lot faster. So that's what I'm thinking about this pandemic. I think it's an opportunity that, we've created ourselves as a human species. I mean, how many times, scientists saw this coming. They kept saying that when you encroach on all of these lands for resource extraction purposes, you are going to, sooner or later, and we're going to get another one. If we're going to expect, we can get, we can find another one of these viruses or pathogens, if we don't learn our lesson this time. But they knew this was coming. They couldn't say when, but they knew it was coming. And so our intensive resource extraction, we have created this as a human species. We've created our own opportunity to grow, and I think we should take it.
Hear, hear.
That's my perspective on that.
Sounds hopeful.
Yeah. And something that I appreciated that I believe it said on one of your books, New Science and Old Wisdom. And I greatly appreciate that too, because I'm a bit of a science nerd, and the more that I read about science, the more I start coming into contact with things that I either heard, growing up, or things that I've kind of dug into as I've gotten older that have been, practices or ideas that are thousands of years old.
It's nice to hear that. and not have people think that, I've been smoking too much something.
Not at all. I think if anything, it just shows that this sort of the what did my friend call it? Settler science, is basically just now getting to the point where it's recognizing the wisdom that people, particularly indigenous cultures, have used for since time immemorial. And science is just now getting to the point where they're like, oh, we figured it out. We're really late to the party, but we figured it out.
They discovered it. Okay. Yeah, they discovered it.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen something on my social media feeds that, this has been discovered, or scientists have understood, or scientists have learned, right? And it's just something yeah, okay, we've known it for, all right,
Yeah. It's been part of our practice for generations. Yeah. And then the more radical scientists over time from various backgrounds, if they went down this road, they were considered crackpots or kicked out of the institution. And yeah, because it all comes around to support capitalism, colonialism, empire.
Well, these researchers that are kind of challenging the paradigm here are vilified more than most. This isn't just benign, new discoveries, right? People are doing research and doing work that is making the old belief system crumble. I mean, it invalidates a lot of the things that traditional science, traditional Eurocentric science has held true for, and it seems silly to say 300, 400, 500 years, because, some of these other knowledge systems are multiple thousands of years older, but Yeah. But anyways, it really challenges them, and it threatens the status quo, and it threatens the whole foundation of capitalism and colonialism and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the artsy question of the group. Is there a book or a song or an action that has sparked some of your work in particular?
From an artistic, wow, there's so many. But interestingly enough, because I am a nerd too, a lot of my political and spiritual knowledge took a leap. As I said, during the time when I was sick, but I picked up a book called Biology Belief by Bruce Lipton, who's a biologist. It's not a book on politics, and it's not a book on spirituality. It's a book on cellular biology. And it was a turning point for me in terms of understanding mind, body, mind, emotion, energy, like all of those connections. That was my starting point. And there's another one written by a curandera who has passed recently. And it's called Woman Who Glows in the Dark. This was another turning point for me. She was a nurse who worked in the system, and at some point recognized that her Mexica teachings were actually helping her clients far more than the medical teachings that she had received. And so she quit her career as a nurse and went into, became a curandera, which is an unusual move to make. You don't have that security anymore of, the job and the good salary and all that stuff. And anyway, so she wrote this great book that talks about the whole belief system and underpinnings of healing in the Mexica tradition. So that was another turning point for me. But they all have political implications.
Yeah. Those are great books. We wanted to sort of, because we're highlighting and we're talking to folks who've been around a bit longer, but we also wanted to ask each of you, is there someone younger that's in the maybe that you're working with with the group, or who's out there publicly as an organizer or a radical that is inspiring you, that you would like to amplify? Tell us about.
So many people, and I wouldn't do justice to kind of I would forget somebody. There's so many names. Mm-hmm. The people I feel like that inspire me the most and excite me the most are the folks who work behind the scenes and balance that straddle that balance of working on themselves while they're working in community. And they're not necessarily going to be the people that you're going to see speaking in front of crowds, or doing interviews or anything like that. They're not going to be necessarily the rally speakers, but these young people are just they're doing their work, and they're taking very seriously this relationship with land, relationship across generations, and they're very gentle, and they're very self-exploratory, and I just have so much respect for them.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like that. Gentle and self-exploratory. That is a good combination.
Yeah.
I feel like there are a billion questions that I could ask. I've also been taking notes, and I'm like, oh geez, I could be here for another 2 hours, but I'm also mindful of time. And we've already had you here for an hour. So I want to be respectful of that.
Yeah. And if you have anything else that you feel we didn't cover, Zainab, or that you would like to speak to.
Nothing really. I just really came here to respond to your questions, and I really feel honored that you asked me to do this. I did want to speak to the whole intention behind joyful militancy, and I think it's a beautiful intention, and I hope it's out there, making a big difference.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, can I just say, I wanted to say this earlier, your interview, like your work throughout the book is something that gets brought up often. And I don't know, I always worry that you don't see that or have that reflected back, especially the gratitude stuff in the outro, but also the how you pulled apart responsibility.
Yeah, I don't actually remember what I said, but I know that my whole way of approaching the notion of responsibility is as responsibility, the ability to respond to the events of your life in the most self-loving, life-affirming ways that you have the capacity to do at any given moment. And so I don't see responsibility as a burden. I see responsibility as something that makes life easier for all of us and makes it sweeter for all of us. So, a lot of times when we, New Age, has really done a job on this mind-body connection type of thing, and the idea that we have an awful lot of power, an awful lot of untapped power that there's no way of learning about. It's really a question of experience. And a lot of the spiritual knowledge around this has been shut down and all of this stuff. So we really do have a lot of power. And there are people who recognize this and tell us that, we've created and co-created, all of the illnesses and problems and difficulties that we've had in life. And I feel like, no, it's a matter of responsibility. It's about letting go and stopping, allow yourself to, as I said before, integrate whatever experiences you've had, to look at, what can be learned, where are the gifts that are encoded, and then take responsibility for now that you are more aware, now that you are, more emotionally intelligent, to now take those experiences, take that information, take that awareness, and make the best decision right now, given the circumstances that you're in. That's really all
Yeah. That's great. That's a great way to end. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Silver Threads is recorded in different places across borders. Carla is located in Canada on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. Eleanor is located here and there, usually either in Sweden or on Piscataway land, now known as Washington, D.C. And our guests join us from around the world. You can find out more about the show and our guests at groundedfutures.com. To learn more about Eleanor's work, visit artkillingapathy.com and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at activisteleanor. For Carla, follow her on Twitter and Instagram at joyfulcarla. You can also reach out to us at silverthreadshow@protonmail.com. And lastly, if you want to support the making of the show, you can donate over at groundedfutures.com. Thank you to the Grounded Futures team for supporting us with promotion. All of the snazzy graphics that you see are created by Jamie Lee Gonzalez. Grounded Futures is a multimedia platform and is produced by Carla Bergman, Jamie Lee Gonzalez, and Melissa Roach. Post-production audio for our show is done by Eleanor Goldfield. The intro and outro music for our show is a song called Floodlight by Eleanor's former band, Rooftop Revolutionaries. Thanks for listening, and now let's go rattle thrones and topple empires.